The ruined village lay silent, broken only by the rattle of distant machine gun bursts and the dull thud of artillery far behind the lines. It was late 1944, somewhere in the shattered heart of France. American infantry, pushing block by block through streets of rubble, were discovering what German defenders had known for months. Urban warfare consumed ammunition faster than any battlefield calculation could predict. Rifles clattered empty, magazines were stripped, and soldiers crouched low in half-collapsed doorways, waiting for resupply trucks that could not reach them. The battlefield, for a moment, was reduced to boots, bayonets, and whatever sidearms hung at a man's belt. The Germans had come to this fight confident. Their infantry carried the familiar Kar 98K rifle, precise and powerful, backed by MP-40 submachine guns in close alleys. Officers and NCOs wore Lugers or Walther P-38 pistols, weapons with a reputation built on German engineering. To them, pistols were symbolic, a badge of rank, a last defense never meant to tip the scale of battle. In their minds, a sidearm would never decide a clash when rifles and machine guns ruled the streets. The Americans carried something different. The Colt M1911, a pistol already 3 decades old, designed by John Browning and chambered in .45 ACP, rested in leather holsters across the belts of officers, sergeants, and tank crews. Unlike the slender German 9 pistols, the M1911 fired a heavy round with devastating stopping power at close range. It was not elegant, but it was brutally effective. The GIs knew it, even if the Wehrmacht dismissed it. In the right moment, when the last rifle clip was spent, that pistol could save a man's life. On this day, that moment arrived. An American platoon, battered from house to house fighting, found themselves cut off in a stone farmhouse at the edge of the village. Their Garans had been fired nearly dry through the morning. Only a handful of clips remained. Across the narrow lane, German troops held strong, their own rifles clicking empty as the fight dragged into its 3rd hour. When the last echoes of rifle fire faded, both sides realized the same grim truth. The fight would be settled up close, weapon against weapon, soldier against soldier. What happened next astonished even hardened veterans. Germans pulled their Lugers, sleek and fast, but the 9 rounds struggled to drop a man quickly in the chaos of close-quarters movement. Americans drew their M1911s, the heavy pistols barking like small cannons, and each shot seemed to carry finality. A sergeant fired twice down a hallway and stopped 2 rushing enemies before they could reload. Another GI, cornered in a kitchen, used his Colt to shatter the wooden banister behind which a German crouched, the .45 round slamming through splinters into flesh. The clash was short, brutal, and decisive. When both sides had emptied their rifles, war came down to sidearms, and to the shock of the German defenders, it was the M1911 that dictated who lived and who fell. The gunfight in that farmhouse was not an isolated skirmish. Across Europe, as the Allies advanced into occupied towns, sidearms were being tested in ways few had anticipated. German doctrine had never prepared for it. Their pistol, the Luger P-08, was prized for craftsmanship, but production costs made it rare by 1944. The Walther P-38 replaced it, cheaper and reliable, yet it fired the same 9 round. German planners expected rifles and machine guns to bear the brunt of combat. Pistols were meant for officers directing squads, not for firefights that turned cellars and alleyways into killing grounds. American doctrine was different. The U.S. Army believed in equipping officers, NCOs, and specialists with a dependable sidearm. Tank crews carried the M1911 because inside a Sherman, when steel was pierced and flames roared, rifles were impossible to wield. Paratroopers jumped with the pistol strapped high on their chest, a last resort when rifles were lost in the darkness of the drop zones. Engineers clearing bunkers carried it for the moments when rifles jammed or space simply vanished. What gave the Colt its reputation was the cartridge. The .45 ACP, designed to drop a man instantly, carried almost twice the mass of a 9 bullet. At 30 feet in a ruined hallway, that difference mattered. A single .45 could end a charge, where German pistols often required repeated hits. Veterans spoke of the sound, a deep, concussive bark that echoed off stone walls like a judge's gavel. Germans who survived close encounters described the effect as unnerving, their pistols sounding sharp but light, while the American weapon cracked like thunder. The weapon's rugged simplicity added to its legend. The Colt could be stripped, cleaned, and reassembled quickly, even in mud or snow. By the time of Normandy, over 2 million had been produced. John Browning's design, born before the Great War, had become one of the most trusted tools of the Second. In the chaos of battle, soldiers came to see it as more than a sidearm. It was insurance, a compact lifeline when primary weapons fell silent. One striking example came during the fight for Aachen, the first major German city to fall into Allied hands. House-to-house combat stretched supply lines thin. A lieutenant leading a squad through a shattered apartment block ran out of Garand clips mid-assault. His men were pinned on the stairwell. Drawing his M1911, he pressed forward, firing at silhouettes darting across doorways. The heavy rounds dropped 3 defenders in seconds, breaking the ambush and allowing his squad to push through. In after-action reports, his men credited the Colt with saving them, calling it the only weapon that didn't hesitate when everything else was empty. Such encounters spread quickly, whispered from platoon to platoon, shaping morale. The Germans had feared the volume of American rifle fire. Now they learned to fear the sidearm, a weapon they had dismissed, but which could end fights when rifles were gone. For them, it was an unexpected lesson in how even secondary tools could change the balance of survival. Wars are not won only by rifles and tanks. They are sustained by the unseen web of factories, shipping, and supply depots that keep weapons in soldiers' hands. When examining why the M1911 pistol emerged so reliably in the field, one must look at America's industrial engine. By 1945, nearly 2 million pistols had been produced, stamped not only by Colt, but by Remington Rand, Ithaca, and even typewriter companies pressed into arms manufacture. The U.S. Army could ensure that from Normandy to the Pacific, every officer, sergeant, and armored crewman had access to the .45. The Germans, by contrast, struggled to supply even their Lugers, producing far fewer and rationing them primarily to officers. Logistics magnified the difference. American ammunition convoys like the Red Ball Express carried mountains of .45 ACP cartridges to the front. Soldiers were rarely in doubt about resupply. German troops, fighting under constant bombardment of their rail network, often rationed 9 rounds. In firefights that stretched into hours, Americans might run dry on rifle clips but still have a pair of full pistol magazines left. That margin could mean the difference between a retreat and survival. The battlefield conditions of 1944 and 1945 made sidearms more critical than doctrine had ever predicted. Urban combat in Aachen, Cologne, and the ruins of Metz collapsed the long engagement ranges that German doctrine favored. Instead of duels across open fields, men found themselves in stairwells, basements, and alleys where a rifle was too long to swing freely. Here the pistol was not a symbol of authority, but the only weapon suited to the space. In these crucibles, the M1911's power was revealed. Accounts from the Battle of the Bulge reinforced this reality. During the desperate defense of Bostonia, American paratroopers dug in under siege-endured days with stretched supply lines. Rifles clicked empty during German assaults in fog and snow. Men spoke of drawing their Colts as the last defense when ammunition boxes failed to arrive. One medic recalled watching a wounded officer, unable to lift his Garand, draw a pistol from his chest holster and fire point-blank at a German grenadier who had breached the perimeter. The .45 round ended the threat instantly. This was not merely anecdote, but reflected in German intelligence reports. Captured documents noted surprise at the volume of pistols encountered among American troops. Wehrmacht analysts compared the stopping power of the Colt unfavorably to their own sidearms, noting that their 9 lacked the same immediate effect. German officers began instructing troops to target American pistol carriers, an admission that these sidearms had shifted from symbolic to strategic. The M1911 had become a paradox, a secondary weapon that, in the most desperate hours, decided outcomes. While rifles and machine guns dictated the tempo of open battle, it was the pistol that settled encounters when chaos stripped soldiers to their last cartridges. And in those moments, the Colt's bark was more feared than its German counterparts, leaving an impression that no amount of engineering elegance could erase. Close-quarters combat is the most personal form of war. When the distance shrinks to mere feet, every movement is amplified, and every weapon is judged not by theory but by the finality of what it delivers. In those spaces, cellars, trenches, shattered staircases, the M1911 earned a reputation that spread as quickly as rumors on the front. One account from Huichin Forest tells of a patrol ambushed while navigating a fog-choked ravine. Their Garands, emptied after the initial exchange, offered no salvation. As Germans pressed in with rifles bayoneted, one American sergeant drew his Colt and fired through the mist. Witnesses recalled the echo of heavy rounds cracking through the trees, each shot halting the advance. By the time reinforcements arrived, the ambush had dissolved, German bodies left where the pistol had spoken. For the men who survived, the .45 became not just a weapon, but a reminder that they were never entirely defenseless. Psychological impact mattered as much as ballistic performance. German troops were accustomed to the sharp crack of a 9 pistol, a sound familiar from their own ranks. The M1911's voice was different, deeper, almost violent in its resonance. In the confines of stone villages, its thunder rolled off walls like artillery. Survivors of close encounters described being shaken not only by the wounds it inflicted, but by the sound itself, a noise that suggested unstoppable force. The pistol's presence became a mental weapon, sowing doubt in moments where confidence could mean survival. In street fighting across Cologne, squads often advanced building by building. Rifles ran empty quickly as defenders fired from upper windows. One corporal, pinned inside a bakery, resorted to his Colt after expending his last clip. He emptied one magazine across a narrow room where Germans crouched behind sacks of flour, the .45 rounds punching through cover and scattering defenders. His after-action report was brief but telling. Garand empty. Colt decided it. That phrase encapsulated the experience of countless others who discovered that when primary firepower was gone, the sidearm was not a fallback. It was the deciding instrument. German pistols lacked that assurance. The Luger, admired by collectors even today, was notorious for jamming when dirt or grit intruded on its fine tolerances. The Walther P38 was more reliable, but its lighter cartridge often demanded multiple hits to incapacitate. In a duel measured in seconds, that hesitation was costly. The M1911, by contrast, delivered brutal certainty. A single round often ended a fight, and the weapon's rugged design endured mud, snow, and blood without complaint. These encounters built a mythology that extended beyond the battlefield. Letters home carried stories of last-second rescues by the Colt. Soldiers swapped tales around campfires of comrades saved by its weight on their hip. For Germans, captured reports revealed a growing respect and fear for the pistol. They had expected sidearms to be ornamental. Instead, they found that in the crucible of close-quarters battle, the Colt .45 was rewriting the rules of survival. By the war's end in 1945, the Colt M1911 had carved a legacy far larger than its compact frame suggested. It was never designed to lead an assault or dominate a battlefield. Yet time and again, it emerged in the decisive instant when rifle bolts locked back and machine guns ran cold to tip the balance. Soldiers remembered it not as a backup, but as the weapon that answered when everything else failed. The statistics underline its reach. Nearly 2.5 million were produced during the war, flooding the arsenals of infantry divisions, armored brigades, airborne regiments, and naval detachments. Factories in Hartford and beyond turned them out with relentless speed, while the War Department ensured every combat arm had access to the sidearm. It was standard issue for officers, yet by 1944, many enlisted men found ways to obtain one, recognizing its value in close quarters where the Garand could not maneuver. German officers, interviewed after surrender, admitted their surprise. They had assumed their sidearms would remain tools of command, not weapons that could change engagements. Their 9 rounds, lighter and faster, could wound effectively, but lacked the stopping power needed in duels where seconds defined survival. To them, it was almost inconceivable that a century-old American design could outmatch the symbols of German engineering. Yet the battlefield made no allowance for pride. The Colt simply worked, reliably, brutally, and decisively. The psychological echo of the pistol outlived the war itself. Veterans spoke of its sound as unmistakable, a low, thunderous crack that carried weight far beyond its caliber. For young soldiers facing their first combat, knowing a Colt hung at their side brought reassurance. It was more than steel and wood. It was a talisman against the uncertainty of war. In contrast, German troops came to view the sight of the heavy American pistol with dread, associating it with fights that never seemed to go in their favor once rifles were spent. The larger lesson was strategic. America's ability to mass-produce a sidearm of such quality reflected not just industrial capacity, but a philosophy of warfare. Every soldier should possess layered tools for survival. Rifles might dictate open battle, but pistols secured the margins, the basements, the stairwells, the moments when units were isolated and supply chains faltered. The M1911 embodied that principle perfectly. Today, when historians recall the iconic weapons of World War II, the M1 Garand, the Sherman tank, or the P-51 Mustang often dominate the conversation. Yet among the men who fought, the Colt .45 holds a quieter but equally powerful place. It was the last line, the final safeguard, the weapon that turned desperate chaos into fleeting control. And in countless ruined villages and forests of Europe, when both sides had fired their last rifle round, it was the bark of the M1911 that decided who walked away.